Yay. Hello everybody, welcome to Melbourne CocoaHeads number 167. It's getting quite long actually. So we'll crack 175 next year, that'll be cool. We've got a great lineup for tonight, so we'll just roll straight into things. In the spirit of reconciliation, I almost said the wrong user group. Melbourne CocoaHeads acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Tonight, full agenda. Amy is going to take us through the month that was, which is always fun after Dub Dub because lots of things happen. Andrew is going to take us through a great talk about debugging difficult conversations. And then, unfortunately, our second speaker, Dan, couldn't make it tonight. He's not feeling particularly well, but we have, with great thanks to Gerald, we've got 2 lightning talks to run through, quick ones. One on visionOS impressions, and then I'll do a little quick one on how I've been finding Swift macros, because I've gone quite deep and it's quite painful. But we're a support group here, right, so we can share that. So just a reminder that we do run our events both in person, online, all of the events under a code of conduct, and that's designed to make everybody feel as safe and welcome as we possibly can. If you, I won't read through the spiel, but there is a link at the bottom there where you can read the full one if you're interested. If at any point you don't feel comfortable or you want to report something, you can either approach myself, one of the other organisers who normally wear badges. I go find where those badges went. Or there are ways to report online, either by email or anonymously, if you prefer as well. So just a bit of housekeeping for those in the room. What have we got? Yeah, toilets are back out through the front doors, past the elevators, turn right. Emergency exits are back out the same way. If you hit the toilets, you've gone too far. Come back a little bit, they're just in there. Hopefully we need the first one, but not the second one, but either way, they're that way. Oh, this is an old slide. We do have little blue dots. If this is your first time here, and please pop on a little blue dot on your name tag back at the front door. It just lets us know that we need to welcome you and look after you and make sure you know your way around. The organisers don't have a red dot anymore. They normally have a little CocoaHeads badge. I don't know where the badges have gone. We'll find the badges once we get going with the talks, but yeah, look for those. As mentioned before, with questions, unless the presenter specifically says it's okay to ask questions during the thing, please wait until the end. As I said, pop your hand up and we will bring a microphone around to you. If you're watching online, please feel free to ask questions in Meetup in Slack in the hashtag Meetup channel, or on directly there in the YouTube chat. Somebody will monitor that and then we'll ask the questions on your behalf as well. That just allows everybody to participate, helps the evening flow a little bit better, means that we're not dealing with interruptions the whole way through. Stickers. You would have seen stickers on the door. We have hundreds. Please help yourself. That one's self-explanatory. Now, our sponsors. We would not be able to put these events on. We would not be able to get drinks, beer and pizza without the help of our sponsors. They also look after our other events as well that we have. So big thank you to EDB Apps who helped provide this venue with their parent mentor group. And to our silver sponsor, Baloo, as well. So we can give a round of applause for our sponsors. I don't think any of them are here tonight, but they'll hear it on the recording, so saves me having to edit it in afterwards. All right, so some of our other events, you hear at the presentation night, we do run other events throughout the month. Next week, on the 3rd Wednesday of every month, and I hope I've got the dates right, I think that's right. On the 3rd Wednesday of every month, we run our Hack Night. That's in conjunction with the GDG Android guys, as well as their web and Flutter parts as well. That's an alcohol-free event. It's in this same spot. We get the tables out, bring your laptops, grab some pizza, talk shop, work on side projects. If you need some help with anything, it's a great place. It's a very welcoming atmosphere to come and join in. On the last Tuesday of every month, so that's the, whatever date it is, the 4th Tuesday this month, but it can be the 4th or the 5th, always the last Tuesday of the month, we have our drinks night or our social night. We did decide on a new venue. I think that was Fad Gallery.
Yeah,
Yes. Unfortunately, our old venue is now closed, something like that. So we're now at a new venue. The meetup page will be updated if it hasn't been already, but there's a hashtag drinks night channel on Slack, which is always the best place for updates and finding out where things are at. Some of our other groups around the place that are worth checking out as well if you're interested. There's a Sydney chapter of CocoaHeads, and there's also the GDG Melbourne, who we run the hack night with as well. Should swap these around a little bit. If you want to find out more information about us, we're on the web, obviously. It's 2023. We haven't got rid of the web just yet, but we're still there. Slack is the main place to communicate. We're over 1,000 people on Slack. It's active sometimes during the day, especially around dub period. But it's a great place to get help with something, or just to talk shop if you're so inclined. And the last one, we actually don't post to Twitter much anymore. That should be the Mastodon URL, which is at Melbourne at cocoaheads.social. We'll get that updated as well. We always post on Mastodon, very rarely on Twitter, but always on Slack. Slack's the best place if you're so inclined. Oh yeah, speaking of Slack, there's a bunch of channels. There's a bit of a guide. Most of the time we're talking about tonight's event in the meetup channel. The other ones are for volunteers. We are a community-run organization. We're always looking for help. So if you would like to get involved in helping to run this and the other events that we have, there's a volunteers channel. There's also a jobs channel and the speakers channel. Finding speakers is always the hardest part about this. You know, putting in a Domino's order is pretty straightforward, but finding speakers is difficult. So if you are interested in speaking, no matter the subject, just reach out in the speakers channel, and I'm sure we can accommodate you in. If you're not sure about speaking, or if you're you know, feeling a bit nervous, we do offer mentoring available as well. More than happy to workshop slides with you and to help you to run through that. Cool. So up to our first talk. Amy's going to take us through the month that was.
Oh, USB-C?
Do you have the dongle on the table there?
Okay. Awesome time. Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome to CocoaHeads for July in 2023. I am Amy. She, her pronouns would be great. So let's cover off the month that was. Post-dub, amazing time, meaning that heaps has been happening and going on. The first big thing for the month is App Store. Sadly, no third-party app stores just yet. The EU hasn't quite been forceful enough with Apple. One day we will get there, but until then, it has been 15 years of the App Store on iOS, which is quite amazing. I'm sure everyone is able to see all of the different apps they've downloaded. My first one was, dare I say it, LinkedIn. I was probably searching for a job at that time. Okay. We won't mention the one above it. Apple Books, yep. Apple Posts, still fairly useful. Then stuff like Instagram, Goodreads, apps that have been around for ages. One of the really nice things that happened in the past couple of days was the indie app sale. Believe most of them have finished, but if you go to this URL there on GitHub, you'll see a list of some really amazing third-party apps from indie developers, some of whom may or may not be in this room. Next thing is everyone's been YOLOing the betas onto their primary devices, I hope. Yep. One of the fun things I did recently to try and actually get deploying onto a Watch OS 10 device working is I just blew away all of my Macs and reinstalled Mac OS, and guess what? It still didn't work. Radars failed, fun times had, back and forths on Mastodon. So where are we at with our beta releases? Most things have beta 3 out. Some of them have a second release. It's still beta 3. It's just a slight bump for a security fix. We have the first beta of visionOS. Gerald will give us a good rundown of that in a little bit. Xcode 15 beta 3. No, that's beta 4. That's pretty cool. Another thing that came out today was the public betas. So any friends that are not on Apple developer accounts, they now have the public betas. Apple also decided to do yet another HTTP type library. This time looking like they're wanting to combine everything from backend and all of their different platforms. So hopefully this will work really well. We'll watch and see and go from there. There's been a whole heap of really good Swift data resources, lots of chatter on Mastodon. Tuns, who I met in Singapore, he has done a really good YouTube video, does a lot of video content, and put up Swift data is way easier than core data. And yeah, it is. Like, it is really nice to play around with. David Smith, who's based over in America, does a lot of really nice Watch OS articles and designs, has been playing around with visionOS as well, and put up some design notes about it. So go here. Vision Pro, it's in July and we're still waiting for more details on what Apple is doing as far as dev kits. Hopefully soon. It's only second week of July, so watch this space. For all of the design people around, we now have Figma as official design resources from Apple. This is pretty cool, pretty big news. They announced it at the same time as the recent Figma conference as well, so that was pretty cool to see all of that happening. Our friends who are based in Melbourne and around Australia have shipped things as well. People that are building outside have done a new release, which is pretty cool for events that are not within an inside venue. Chris, who spoke here a couple of months back, did some releases of all of his video editing tools. Hopefully at some stage he'll come back and talk about his recent adventures with the App Store, and we'll go from there. Now, do we really need a weather forecast in Melbourne? maybe, maybe not, but what we now have is we get notifications if it's going to rain, and these are pretty good. I did have one situation where I was out cycling and had phone on the handlebar, and it was like, oh yeah, no rain. Got caught in the rain. Went home, tried to charge the phone. It's like, nope, you've got water in the connector. It's not going to happen. It ended up drying out, so yay, modern hardware is actually really, really good. Next thing going on this month is security and privacy. We now have in macOS 14 Sonoma the ability for third-party browsers, so ones that aren't Safari, to get password autofill from the inbuilt password manager, which is really, really nice. So stuff like your passkeys, your two-factor authentication, all of your passwords that are stored in your keychain will be available to third-party browsers. This one's probably really relevant for everyone here in the room, in that you can now do passkeys on GitHub. You'll need to enable it in their sort of upcoming features stuff, but it is a really nice thing because passkeys are awesome and they should get a lot more adoption. App privacy labels came out a while ago, and if you've been following different conversations on Mastodon, you've probably seen variations of this particular image going around. As I've said there, comments go in a thread. And we'll leave it at that. We now return you to your regular scheduled program.
All right, so here we go. All right, so while Andrew's plugging in, bit of a background. So Andrew is a tech geek, technical leadership coach, and founder of Tech Leaders Launchpad, an online leadership course and community designed specifically for new and emerging tech leaders. Sounds like me one day. Andrew's been in the industry for over a decade, working for consultancies and SaaS companies, and he's seen it so often where companies promote their best engineers into leadership positions, but don't teach them the skills required to be an effective leader. I've seen that happen a lot too.
Yes.
TLL is here to change that and make sure that with the right support and guidance, every new leader can enjoy and thrive in their leadership journey. It looks like our slides have picked up okay.
It worked.
It worked.
That's surprising. We spent about 20 minutes at the beginning of this trying to get the hardware actually working. So this is good.
All right, let's go.
Awesome. Hey, hello. I kind of wanted to start this off with a little bit of a description of why I'm talking about this particular topic and why difficult conversations are so important to me. It kind of starts right at the beginning of my career. I had the misfortune of becoming a leader incredibly early. And I say misfortune because I had no idea what I was doing. By the time I was 23 years old, I was running a team of 10 people. What 23-year-old knows how to be an employee, let alone be a leader? And I made a whole heap of mistakes. And two mistakes that I made within quick succession are related to difficult conversations that we have and how they're pivotal in our careers and how they kind of have an impact throughout the whole of our lives. And one of them was I'd hired somebody who was an excellent engineer. She was absolutely incredible, but she didn't fit in with the team. It was a massive culture clash. And in typical English fashion, I didn't say anything. I kind of just closed my mouth and let things go on. And I ended up losing my best engineer because of this culture clash. And so I'd hired one person who wasn't the right fit, and by not speaking up, I lost another person who was the right fit. That was a difficult conversation I didn't have. About a week later, my boss pulled me into a meeting room and said to me, Andrew, what's your job? When your boss pulls you in a meeting room and asks you what your job is, that's never a good sign. This isn't going to be a fun, happy conversation. This is going to be a difficult conversation. And so my boss asked me, what's your job? And I said, to write code. And he said, no, Andrew, you're the lead engineer. What's your job? What's your job as a lead engineer? And I thought about it for a moment, and I said, to write really good code. Nah. That wasn't the answer he was wanting. And this could be a story of me getting fired. This could be a story of me walking away from this job. But luckily for me, it ended up being the start of a coaching relationship between me and this boss. And he taught me a lot about being a leader and a lot about what it meant to focus on those things that are outside of your own contributions and how you can help other people. So this is the story of two difficult conversations. The one that I didn't have, that resulted in a really big mistake, and one that my boss had, which resulted in me starting to coach, be his coachee. And so difficult conversations for me have kind of been this thing that has stuck throughout my entire career as these pivotal moments. And they're also incredibly important in our personal lives. So that's why I put this talk together, because I genuinely believe that our success in our lives, personal or professional, are directly proportional to the number of difficult conversations that we have in them. So this is what we're going to go through tonight. We're going to go through the what and the why of difficult conversations. What are they? Why should we have them? I'm going to take you through the mindset and preparation that's important in being effective in having them, and we'll go through some models, worksheets, and examples, and a little bit of Q&A at the end. I think we might run out of time for the Q&A. That's my fault. Apologies if we do, because I just like to talk. If we do, please come chat to me afterwards. Okay, so who am I? This person stood in front of you. I'm a long-term father of a flock of chucks, or as we call them in England, chickens. I'm a long-term father of a flock of humans, or as we call them in England, financial burdens. And I love travel, I love getting out there, and I love seeing the world, hence why I now live in Australia. From a professional point of view, I've been coding for about 20 years at this point. Been, like I said, a tech leader incredibly early in my journey. But I've kind of the last few years I've kind of pivoted and focused more on teaching and training leadership skills, because like Box said, in our industry we've got a huge problem. We have so many great smart engineers that just really struggle to understand the difference between being a great individual contributor and being a great leader. And so I founded Tech Leaders Launchpad to solve that problem. Okay, what are difficult conversations? All conversations. Depends if you're an extrovert or an introvert, I guess. Depends whether you're speaking in your mother tongue. There's a lot of things that could be difficult conversations. The way that I like to think about them are things that have high stakes or high emotions associated with them. They're either something which you're going to go into that, and there's the impact of that conversation is going to be big in terms of what happens afterwards, or your emotional state during and after the conversation. That's kind of my definition of a difficult conversation. And so we think about some of those. They're things like giving feedback, telling somebody the quality of their work isn't good enough, or telling somebody that their professional behavior isn't good enough. They're things like asking for promotion, like going and trying to persuade somebody why they should give you that role that you deserve, or give you that pay rise that you deserve. And then the other side of that is saying no, why you shouldn't get that promotion, and why you haven't met the markers. These are high stakes, high emotion situations. But there could be other things as well. Like I said, I'm an introvert. Standing up on stage giving this presentation for me is incredibly difficult. This is not something that comes naturally to me at all. And so it's a difficult conversation for me because there's high emotions associated with it. But there's some other things as well that we might not think of, such as architectural decision making. If you're going into a discussion with a group of people about whether or not you should implement a particular approach, or what library you should use, or what back-end infrastructure you should use. There could be high emotions associated with that, and there's definitely high stakes. And so they can be difficult conversations as well. And lastly, there's a bunch on this slide, but I'm just going to touch on one more, which is interviewing. Either being interviewed or interviewing somebody else. You might not think it if you're hunting for a job, but the person on the other side of the Zoom call or the other side of the table is probably just as charged by the conversation as you are. I've interviewed hundreds of people in my career, and it's still a difficult conversation for me as somebody interviewing somebody else. There's high emotions involved. Am I going to disappoint this person? Are they the right fit? Am I going to find that person that I've been hunting for? And there's obviously high stakes involved because hiring is a high stakes environment. So when you're thinking about difficult conversations, I want you to use this as your mental reference. Are there high stakes? Are there high emotions? Because these are the things that drive difficult conversations. And so if that's what they are, why do this talk? Why am I talking about difficult conversations? Well, what happens if we don't have them? What happens if we don't have a difficult conversation? Somebody shout something out. Nothing. Yes, it's a really, really great point. Normally what people say at this point is nothing, because you're absolutely right. If you don't have a difficult conversation, nothing can happen. There's something else, though. What happens if you don't have a difficult conversation? What's even worse than nothing happening? Something really bad. Yeah, things could get worse. So I normally go into a tirade at this point about my beloved Land Rover. I'm going to try and keep this talk short and not spend 20 minutes talking about it. But this is my pride, or was my pride and joy. It's genuinely my one regret moving to Australia, is that I had to leave this Land Rover behind. It was one of those cars. I'm not a car person, but just walking past this car made me smile, knowing that I owned it. It's a huge regret. Anyway, this talk is not about me. It's about difficult conversations. So this Land Rover was a vehicle that I toured all the way around Europe. We used to get on the ferry from the UK, and I'd just drive around Europe for a week, and then I'd come back. Amazing, going to France, Germany, Luxembourg, just everywhere. This one particular trip, I went to the Land Rover, and I always do a pre-check just to make sure nothing's having an issue. So I'm doing my pre-check, and I look on the floor, on the road under the Land Rover, and there's oil on the floor under the Land Rover. Now, for those of you who don't know Land Rovers, that's not necessarily a problem. If it doesn't leak, you've probably got a problem in that there's no oil in it. So as a Land Rover, a little bit of oil leaking isn't a huge problem. But there was a little bit more than I expected. Typical English fashion, I'll be fine. Get in the car, go off on my journey. Driving down the French motorway, and I start hearing this. Take the engine off, don't hear anything, start driving again. Okay, fair enough. Be fine. Keep driving, going down the Luxembourg highway. Grinding noises come from under the vehicle. I think I should probably stop now. And as that thought crosses my mind, the whole wheels lock up and the car skids to a stop from 120 kilometers an hour to zero. So, I'm in Luxembourg, in the highway, but I'm fortunate. I'm actually genuinely fortunate at this point. Everybody's safe. There's not a problem. Not only that, but I break down 1 mile from a Land Rover specialist garage. Very, very lucky. Not only that, they have the exact part I need to fix my car. Genuinely very lucky circumstance. But they know they're the only garage in 100 miles that can fix my problem. And they know I've got a car that doesn't work. Do you know how much I paid to fix my Land Rover on a Luxembourg highway? 18,000 euros. What choice did I have? Getting it towed back to the UK would have cost me more. So I had to pay it. Do you know how much it would have cost if I'd have fixed it when I saw the oil on the floor in the UK? About $30 for some oil. Do you know how much it would have cost to fix it when I heard that knocking noise when I was on the French motorway? Probably $100 of gears and another couple of $100 of labor. So I didn't respond to that, and it cost me that much money. Why am I telling this story? What have Land Rovers got to do with difficult conversations? Because this is what happens if you ignore difficult conversations. Sometimes nothing happens. Often things get worse. We've all had these situations where we're approaching something, we know this is going to be a difficult conversation, and we shy away from it. We don't want to have the difficult conversation, and so we don't have it. We make up excuses why we're not going to do it. Or things will get better by themselves. That person, they'll just leave and then I won't have to deal with it. You know, they're going to quit anyway. It's fine. I don't need to deal with it. Or somebody else will do it for me. And yet, every time we have this delay tactic on difficult conversations, things don't get better by themselves. Either nothing happens or they get worse. And so the next time you're seeing a difficult conversation in the future, when you feel it brewing, when you see that oil dripping on the ground, and you're asking yourself, should you tackle this problem now? I want you to think of me in a garage in Luxembourg crying as I hand over my credit card. Because the same thing's going to happen to you if you ignore a difficult conversation. Okay, but the last thing I want to touch with this, before we kind of get into the meat of what I'm going to talk about, is part of what I do as a job is I do training courses. So I come into companies and I teach this kind of stuff for companies. And one of the things that people say to me when I teach this stuff is, okay, great, are you going to teach me to be comfortable telling somebody that their code sucks? Are you going to teach me that I'm going to be comfortable interviewing somebody? Are you going to teach me that I'm going to be comfortable telling somebody that they're fired? No. Because comfort means you've lost the connection with the person on the other side of the table. Comfort means you're not being empathetic. Comfort means you don't care. The emotional stakes for you are gone. And so I never want you to be comfortable going into those conversations. I want you to be confident going into them, which is a different concept. Being confident, feeling like you're in the right place to have it, that you're in the right mental state, you've prepared for it, but not comfortable. Because if I'm going into a performance conversation with somebody, if I'm telling them that the way they're doing the thing they're doing is not right, and I'm comfortable, I've lost that emotional connection. I don't care about the person anymore. And so I encourage you, be confident, not comfortable. Okay, let's move on to the meat of actually telling you. I've told you what difficult conversations are. I've told you why they're important. Let's tell you how to actually deal with them. The two words I want you to go through your mind when you see a difficult conversation that you're approaching is mindset and preparation. So mindset. This is the way we're thinking about the conversation. It's the internal narrative that we tell ourselves about what's happening. It's the way that we can encourage ourselves to actually have the conversation. And often a lot of mindset comes down to courage. The courage to actually have the conversation. Again, back to me on the highway crying with a credit card. Because if we don't have those things happen. And so courage being the most important thing, what is some of the things that can challenge our courage to have difficult conversations? Somebody want to shout something out? Why might we shy away from them? Anxiety, yeah, definitely. Anybody else? The person we have to talk to is mean, was what was said. One last one.
Consequences.
Ooh, consequences. Tell me more about consequences. Too much at stake. Yeah, definitely, definitely. There's one other thing that kind of encapsulates a lot of these different things, and it's imposter syndrome. This is I always try and find a way to get imposter syndrome into my talks because it's such a big thing in our industry, and this is the crux of a lot of what's happening when we shy away from these conversations, because we don't feel like we should be the one having these, or we don't feel like we're equipped enough to have these conversations, or we don't feel like we're in the right authority position to have those conversations, which is just ridiculous. But it's there, it's something we can feel. And the way I want you to get out of that is to ask yourself a few questions, to reframe your mindset, to get into a place where you have the courage to have the difficult conversations. And the first question I want you to ask yourself when you see this difficult conversation on the horizon is, why is it in my best interests to have this difficult conversation? I want to start with a little bit of selfishness. Let's talk about us for a minute. Let's talk about why it's in my best interest. Because this is one of the best ways to get over that initial hump of not having the courage to do it. So say, for example, let's pick a situation. Let's say I'm a junior and I'm behind on my projects. And I've not told anybody I'm behind. I've not told them that I'm stuck. And there was this ticket that I picked off the board. It said a day. I'm 4 days in. And I've not told anybody that not only am I 4 days into this ticket, but I'm stuck and I have no idea what to do. So why is it in my best interest to have this difficult conversation? I can come up with a whole heap of things here. Because I get to work on something new and different and interesting. Because I get to solve the problem that's really been annoying me. Because I want to be in a place where I'm learning and developing, and I want to know how to solve this problem. So there's a bunch of ways you can answer this question. Why is it in my best interest to have this conversation? Another question to ask is, why is it in the best interest of the other person? So if I'm having this discussion with the project manager or the delivery lead or the tech lead, whatever you have in your organization, well, it's in their best interest because they're making assumptions about my work and the things that I'm doing and the velocity and where we're going with this and the release schedules. Again, there's a bunch of ways I can answer this question of why it's in the other person's best interest. A tricky one, which for anybody wanting to step into leadership positions, this is a really great mental exercise, because part of moving into leadership is elevating the altitude of how you think about problems and trying to think in a more high level altitude. And so asking yourself, why is it in the best interest of my team to have this difficult conversation, is a great way to kind of practice that way of thinking. And in my example with the junior, it could be because maybe other people in my team are waiting for me to finish this so they can do their piece of work. Or it could be, I want to have a culture in my team of everybody being open about where they are and how they've progressed and what blockers they've got. So again, there's a bunch of ways we can answer that. And then the highway credit card question. We start off with selfishness. We move to empathy for the other person. We move to a higher level altitude. Let's end with some fear. What happens if I don't have this difficult conversation? So all of these questions are kind of geared towards giving you the courage to have the difficult conversation. It's meant to be a place where you can really gain that higher level understanding of why you're doing this, get through the fear, get through the imposter syndrome, and get yourself to actually talk to that person. But if you're talking to that person, then you then need to prepare yourself for that. You need to be in the right mental state, yes, but we also need to do the right preparation. And a question for the room, what things could happen in a difficult conversation that might be helped if we prepare better?
Lower the emotional stakes.
We could definitely lower the emotional stakes, 100% agree. Anybody else? Turn that question around. What happens if we don't prepare? What could go wrong if we don't prepare?
Oh, you can say something dumb.
You could say something dumb, yeah. Like what? Like, what's a good example or a good category of examples of a dumb thing you might say?
Most painful situation. If someone's not
Yeah.
might come across.
Yeah.
Really condescending or nasty or negative or...
Yeah, exactly. You could be condescending or nasty or negative if you don't prepare for it. Another thing that could happen is maybe they're just going to say something you didn't expect, and you know, if you've not prepared for it and you've not thought about what they could say, you might not know how you can answer that. So there's a bunch of things that can be helped by better preparation. So the questions, I'm going to give you another series of questions to ask that should help you with the preparation. So gathering data and outside opinions. If you're going to say a fact, if you're going to give a piece of data when you're in a difficult conversation, you sure as hell better have that data right. You don't want to be saying something that is easily proven wrong. If you're using it as the reason behind the feedback you're giving, or the reason why you want to use a particular library or framework, you sure as hell better have the data correct if you're using it. But outside opinions can also be useful. Somebody, if you're making a value judgment on something, if you're saying, I think this thing because I think this other thing, then what are the other opinions? What other opinions can you gather from experts or from outside parties or people who are maybe not as emotionally invested in a situation? So spending the time gathering the data and the outside opinions means that you can more fully understand and be prepared for what somebody else might say during the conversation. We could also think through possible objections. So if I'm giving somebody some performance feedback, like say for example, I work for a consultancy, and my colleague, every time he gets into the meeting, my colleague gets his phone out, kind of sits back a bit and plays with his phone for a little bit while the client's there. I might personally think that isn't the way that I think we should interact with clients. That's my opinion. So I could use this first thing of going, okay, well, I'm just going to speak to, before I kind of barrel into this and give this person this performance feedback, I'm just going to see what everybody else in the company thinks. I'm going to ask some people if this is acceptable behavior to them, and maybe ask my boss, maybe ask some peers. But I could also think through the objections that person could have. Like maybe they don't see why it's a problem. And so I can explain to them the impact of their behavior and why they're doing it. Or maybe they could be going, okay, well, actually, my wife is in hospital and I need to make sure. And I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, that's fine. I get it. But maybe you could say that at the beginning of the meeting to the client and say, look, I've got a personal problem. I'm checking my phone. It's because of the personal problem. I apologize if that seems rude. So by thinking through these possible objections, you can find the different ways the conversation can go. And again, have multiple plans for those objections. Cool. Again, like I said, I teach this kind of stuff internally to organizations. And a lot of people at this point say to me, aren't you just manipulating the other person? Aren't you just spending all this time thinking about this and putting this together so that you can manipulate the other person? No. Manipulation is a state of mind, it's an intent, it's not a skill set. The skill set is influence, it's communication, it's these things that are skills, but they don't have a value judgment associated with the skills. The value judgment is on how you use it. I work a lot teaching people to be more influential with other people in their organization. So, how do you explain complex technical ideas to non-technical audiences? How do you convince other teams within your organization to use the libraries and frameworks that you think are the best fit? All of this stuff comes from a place of believing that your choice is the best choice for them and being open to the fact that it might not be. So the difference between influence and manipulation is convincing somebody to do something that isn't in their own interests. Influence is convincing them to do something that is, and being open to the fact that you might be wrong in that. And so if you're looking at this and getting this negative feeling that you don't want to learn these skills because you don't want to learn to manipulate, just push that down and understand that it's your state of mind and your intent is what is important here. All skills could be used negatively. Okay, so I want to give you something to take away, because the difficult part with a talk like this, especially something this short, is that I've just talked at you for 24 minutes. And you're going to leave this room and forget 95% of what I said. So I want to make sure that you remember the 95%. So I put together a little PDF. This PDF takes you through all of the questions that I've just talked about. When you see one of these difficult conversations on the horizon, you can use this PDF to remind you about the talk that I've just given and prepare and get in the right mindset for it. The other thing it's got is, so it's basically 3 pages. The last 2 pages are mindset and preparation. The first page asks you a couple of questions that I've not taken you through, which is the logistics of the difficult conversation, the what and the who of it. So the first part of it is to try and ask you to think about the difficult conversation in as objective way as possible, to try and take your emotions out of it and position it as objectively as possible, because that's how you're going to get in the best place to be in the right mindset. It also encourages you to think about who should be involved in the difficult conversation, because we want the right number of people there and nobody else. If I'm giving somebody performance feedback, I'm probably not going to do it in the middle of the stand-up on a Zoom call with everybody else. If I'm asking somebody to help me on something, I might do that in a more public forum or a more private forum, but at least let's think about it. So who will be involved in it? When should you have this difficult conversation? Generally not at 4:30 on a Friday. I worked for a boss, and I won't tell you who it is. He rang me up at 4:30 on a Friday when my wife was in hospital. And he knew my wife was in hospital because I'd signed off sick for that day. And he said to me, Murph, I need you to ring so-and-so up and fire them. I was like, okay. No. No, I'm not doing that, because it's going to ruin their weekend. It's going to absolutely ruin their weekend. Talking to somebody about this type of stuff is just, it needs to be the right time, the right place, the right circumstance. And if you do that at 4:30 on a Friday, you're sending somebody into a spiral for the entire weekend. I was talking to somebody this lunchtime. I had lunch with somebody, and he told me that he had a phone call just before he got on a flight to tell him that his role was being made redundant. And this was a flight that was a 14-hour flight from Abu Dhabi to Melbourne. You can imagine those 14 hours did not go well for him. So thinking about when you have these conversations is just as important as how you have them, because they're crucial to getting that other person in the right mental state. I left that job, by the way. The week afterwards, I handed my notice in, because that is not the type of boss I want to work for. Where is also important, because should you do it on Zoom? Should you do it in a private meeting room? Should you do it in, like, there's all of these logistics around it are important. And then, like I said, the next couple of pages are all the questions that I've taken you through. So the mindset questions of why is it in my best interest? Why is it in theirs? Why is it, in the interest of the team? What will happen if I don't have it? The preparation questions of data and opinions and objections and ways this could go awry. So the next time you're having a difficult conversation, I really want you to take a step back, think about it, think about the logistics, think about the mindset, think about the preparation, and the question, if you have the courage to have it, and if you don't have the courage, why? What are the things that are holding you back, and how can you get over those? And lastly, focus on being confident, not comfortable. Remember, we don't want to be comfortable because we've lost empathy for the other person. Cool. So lastly, I just want to quickly mention this before we move to the end slide. If you want to know more about Tech Leaders Launchpad, the type of stuff we're doing, and the training courses we're building, there's a big, lovely QR code there. And that's it. Thank you. there's a few links on there. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, there's the one on the right. If you want to learn more about Tech Leaders Launchpad, the one on the left, and the one on the middle is the worksheet QR code if you missed it earlier.
Did anybody have any questions? You can see a few people with their phones out taking photos of QR codes.
I can post all the links to the Slack as well. So join the Slack.
No questions? Oh, sorry. I was looking this way.
Hey, thanks for the really good talk. Very encouraging. My question is, what happens if a difficult conversation goes wrong?
Yeah. So this is a great question. Hopefully, in that process of preparing the mindset and the data and the opinions and everything, you're thinking through some of the ways it can go wrong, and you're hopefully anticipating those. So most of the time when it goes wrong, you should have a plan. When something happens that you haven't anticipated, I think it's important that you understand the why behind why you're doing the conversation, because then you can work with the other person to kind of get the best outcome. If you haven't done that work in the beginning of why this is important and the outcomes you want from it, and why it's important to you, why it's important to them, as soon as it goes awry, you kind of get lost in the weeds of what you're actually trying to accomplish, and you can sometimes start arguing minutiae. Whereas actually having that situation where you've thought and you've taken that step back and you've asked yourself what you're trying to achieve by this can keep you kind of directed of the conversation of where it's productive to end up.
Yep. Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned something interesting in that being working with the other person in order to have a conversation that produces a good outcome. What if the other person isn't willing to work?
Yeah, so this is where that second question is really important, of why it's in their best interest to have it. This is something that not only helps you get over the courage sometimes to have the conversation in the first place and kind of be in that mental state to have it, it can also be a great way to show the other person why they should be involved and engaged in the conversation. So this is kind of back to the whole how do you influence somebody type discussion, and it's really difficult to influence somebody to do something that isn't in their best interests. And so, really spending that time to ask yourself and to analyze why it's in their best interests, you will be able to put together a compelling argument as to why they should engage with it in the first place.
Can you speak a little bit to the format of the Tech Leaders Launchpad, like how
Sure.
how it works?
Sure, yeah. So think of it as plural site, but instead of technical skills, it's leadership skills. So you pay a fee, you get access to a whole curriculum which is based on everything that new leaders need within their first kind of year of leadership. So the mindsets that are effective for new leaders, the skill sets that are needed, learning things like personal productivity, the difference between being accountable and responsible for work, delegating efficiently, communicating with their peers, influencing people, giving performance feedback, like all of the things that, when I was a leader, I wish I knew. And I just had to learn through like just trial and error and the great people around me. I just wanted to have one place that kind of put all of that together.
So it's an asynchronous kind of
Yes.
course-based structure rather than a mentorship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, where part of what I want to build off the back of it is a community, and part of that community will have mentorship as an element. That doesn't exist yet, but it's my aspirations to build it, and I will be building it.
Thank you.
Question. Did you, while preparing for presentation, think about the possible outcomes and apply your own methodology while preparing for this, labeling yourself an introvert?
Sorry, I couldn't actually hear the
Did
full
you
question.
did you go through your own process while preparing the presentation?
Oh, did I go through my own process while preparing for this presentation? Yes, I did. I also used another another one of my techniques, which is about how do you communicate effectively, which is to break something down into what do you want people to feel, what do you want them to think, and what do you want them to do after the communication. And so I use that with this particular talk of like, what did I want you to do, and how did I want you to think about difficult conversations, and how did I want you to feel about them. So all of the techniques that I kind of teach, I use all the time, because they're genuinely the way that I think are the best way of doing this as an engineer, and using that algorithmic mindset that we have as engineers to kind of apply to people problems.
If the person you have to have a difficult conversation with is say your boss, is there a better way of doing that than simply moving on to a different job?
So for the benefit of the online crowd, the question was, if the person you're having a difficult conversation with is your boss, how do you kind of handle that circumstance without losing your job? Influencing up is a skill which is a superpower that most people forget about, because we can just forget that actually our bosses don't know everything we know, and don't have the context that we have, and often are not privy to the day-to-days in the same way as we are. And so influencing up is definitely something that I encourage everybody to become better at. How you do that effectively is generally the same way that you do everything else, in that if you're approaching it with empathy and you're approaching it with an understanding that this is your point of view and you might be wrong, that's how you kind of get the best outcomes from that. Because most of the time your boss got their job because they're good at what they do, and so sometimes they're right, but also sometimes they're wrong. And going into it with that mindset of I believe that I'm right, but I'm open to being proved wrong, is the best way to kind of approach that without getting their back up and causing their own kind of ego to get in the way.
All right.
Cool. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you.
Is that the microphone?
Yep.
Oh, okay, cool.
That's the one on the thing right in front of you.
Right, okay. Hello. So this is like a bit last minute, so apologies for the rough slides. So just gonna talk a little bit about like experiences with playing around with visionOS. So I've been lucky enough to be able to kind of watch a lot of WWC videos and also play around with the SDK and things. So just talking a bit about that. My name is Gerald, by the way. There's some contact information. Don't really post a lot on Mastodon though, but you can catch me on CocoaHeads Slack. Cool. So I'll assume that everybody's already watched the WWC video. You know the basic like marketing spiel of the visionOS. So I'll skip over for a lot of this kind of stuff. I guess the important parts for us as developers is Amy kind of went over a lot of that already. Where the beta 1 of the SDK is out already with Xcode 15. The human interface guidelines are out available as well, and Figma files for like if you wanted to try to prototype things are also available. So this is kind of what Apple sees that having the interface for visionOS looks like. You sit or you stand anywhere, like at a desk or your kitchen table, and you can have all sorts of floating 2D windows primarily. And this is kind of, I think, where a lot of the sessions and things were kind of geared towards, is making these 2D panels with 3D content if you wanted to. There's already been some third-party developers that have started playing around with the SDK, and they've been making some cool things. So these are just some examples. Apps like pCalc, I think that's Dolphin emulator. You can play like your Nintendo games on the walls and things. Probably won't ever see that in the App Store, but someone's working on it. So just a really quick one. I mean, a lot of this stuff, like Apple has WWC videos. There's 41 videos. There's quite a lot of information out there on like making apps for visionOS and kind of the basic app types. So this is kind of just going through like that there'll be 3 kind of versions of things. You can primarily do window, like 2D panels. There's volumes where you can start introducing 3D content that the user can walk around. And then there's spaces, which are your app basically takes over the entire room, and you can do all sorts of cool things like ray casting, hand tracking, and things like that. But in Apple's HIG, they kind of recommend that most of your UI is in Windows. So you're kind of navigating around, getting to things that you want, and then kind of use 3D content as a accent to kind of wow the users. And it's also kind of the hardest to develop as well. So a really good example of a sample app, and one that, if you're interested in visionOS, this would probably be like a really good place to start, is they have a Hello World sample app, and it kind of showcases the 3 experiences of Windows, and then they have volumes where you can kind of view planets in 3D space and like walk around it and stuff. And even the immersive spaces where you're kind of surrounded by space. So just kind of the starting with the, I guess, as a starting point for visionOS development, you can take your existing iOS apps and just kind of run in compatibility mode. They just work, really with no additional work needed. The prefers iPad, so it'll show up as an iPad app, and it's kind of similar to like if you remember when the iPad first came out. And some apps are still like this, where the iPhone app kind of just shows up as a blown-up version on the iPad app. It kind of feels a little bit like that, but, I mean, it works. So Apple says, oh, there's hundreds of thousands of apps that will be available from day one. And it works, but it's not quite the best. So I have a screenshot on the side where Simon BS on Mastodon, he had the iPad compatible version of his app, and then he kind of converted it over to visionOS, and that's kind of, you can see the differences there. So I'm not going to go over all of these, but it's basically like you can kind of see that it's got that nice frosted glass look, and that's kind of, they had specifically designed the materials to kind of dynamically change with environment. So you can see like the top screenshot is like a light room, and the bottom screenshot is a dark room. It'll kind of change with the lighting in your real world to make your content and your text the most readable it can be. So even like the text colors will shift as well. And that all comes with, if you're using the system colors and the font colors and things. If you're not, then that means you just have to do a little bit more work in probably your design team needs to figure out like what looks good on the frosted background, and should we be looking at using the special like colors, the foreground colors and things that Apple provides. Other cool things is even in running in compatibility mode, kind of skip, even running in compatibility mode, you get access to the new kind of interface paradigm where it's kind of, they call it gaze and pinch. So this is where it tracks your eyes, and your eyes kind of act like a mouse cursor. So if you want to like close an app, you kind of just look at the close button and then just pinch your fingers. And you can be really lazy with the pinch as well. Like you don't have to hold your fingers up and do pinch. You can kind of like leave it lazily in your lap. And it's supposed to be like a really quick and intuitive way to kind of get around your apps. But if you convert the app and make it visionOS compatible, or build for visionOS specifically, you get a couple other cool things like for search bars. They have this thing where you can just look at the search bar and then speak your search term, and then it'll just run the search. So you don't have to actually look at it, click it, maybe type it on the awkward keyboard or speak it. It's a lot more fluid like that. There's also specific UI elements that are only available in visionOS. So things like ornaments. There's like floating toolbars and stuff. Yeah, and also, of course, being able to integrate 3D models in volumes and spaces. So it's actually not too hard for an iOS team. Like I kind of tried to run it once, and it's just like you need to fix compatibility issues. You might have to do checks to make sure that certain features are available. Like for example, you cannot access the camera with the Vision Pro device. Just most kinds of like AV Foundation camera is just not accessible. So you kind of have to make sure you have checks around that to make sure, does my device support camera on an iPhone? But on a Vision it says not, the camera's not available. And one other thing was, so what can we do now? We don't have the visionOS, the Vision Pro device. It's not going to come out till early 2024 in the US, maybe even early 2025 for us in Australia. So how do we kind of get a feel of how it works? You can use existing devices. So we have the kind of mixed reality headsets like the Quest 2 and the Quest Pro. They have, there's actually prototyping apps available on those platforms. So some of them, some apps like there's Gravity Sketch, Shapes XR, and that allows you to import in assets like images and things. And you can even turn on pass-through, so you can see like what does it look like when I'm standing at my kitchen table and have floating windows. And then just, I think it was this week, Shapes XR has enabled gaze and pinch as an experimental feature when interacting with prototypes. So that's pretty cool. I actually have a headset here, so if anyone's interested in having a go with it, it's pretty neat. Although with the Quest 2, it's more like, it's not gaze and pinch since it doesn't have that capability. It's more like forehead laser and then try to point at things with that. But if you're lucky enough to have a Quest Pro, I did get a chance to try one at a meetup a few weeks ago, and it's not perfect, but it's still pretty compelling to have like it track your eyes and being able to select elements like that. Yeah, so has anyone had a chance to play with the simulator yet, the visionOS simulator? A few people. Okay. I'll give a quick demo of what that looks like. So this is just a sample app that I made, and it's, let's see if is it readable. Yes. Cool. So it's just, I'm using SwiftUI for it. And if you kind of look at the the UI code for it. It's not anything specific to visionOS. It's just standard Swift UI, making a list, using text and spacers. Let's see. Yep, and there's like a tab view. I'm using the standard tab views with labels and things. So yeah, this doesn't look really any different. So if I go ahead and run the app, and I'm selecting the Apple Vision Pro as the simulator, and so this one is just like a generic banking app that I made, but it's got the tab view kind of ornament here, and if I mouse over it, you can kind of see that it kind of expands and shows the tabs. So this is just, instead of having the tabs like the bottom of your iPhone screen, it's just the tabs will show up on the side now. None of this is really, like I haven't made this interactable. It's a really simple demo. You can kind of see how it works. I have the dynamic glass background. I can move the window around. You can even do that with compatible apps. You could resize the windows to be as big as you want. So now I'm going to have it fill up my entire screen. And yeah, and so the simulator kind of has like it's like basically being in a video game. I'm in a video game living room, and I can kind of navigate around it. So now I can go see what happens. What does it look like behind my app? And personally, I find these little movement controls at the bottom like really awkward to use. It's much easier to connect a Bluetooth gamepad controller, and then use the gamepad to kind of fly around the room, and then you can use your mouse or trackpad to kind of simulate your eyes and then click on things. So it's like I wanted to click on the buttons. Yeah, there we go. And the simulator has like some of the pre-built apps, and I've made the Hello World, if it chooses to click on it. And it's not. Let me reset my. There we go. Oh, it's not clicking. Beta 1, people. Yeah, and then you can change your environment around. So now I want it to be the living room in the daytime. There's even museum kind of environments that you can kind of try out your app in. It's still not working on the home screen.
Can you change the controller in the bottom right?
That's a good one. Yeah. Thanks, Pat. Yep, so this is the sample app Hello World. Just being able to view the 3D content, and you can kind of see what it's like to walk around the globe. And then if you wanted to see the immersive space, this feels a bit like, oh, it just screen flickered, but it's supposed to have gone into VR mode on the headset. So yeah. Anybody, do we have time for questions?
Yeah.
Cool.
Does anybody have any questions? Amy?
Hey Gerald, a lot of the demo content seems to be Swift UI. Have you played around with UIKit at all in visionOS?
No, I haven't. I've heard that it's mostly okay, but there's certain UI elements that are Swift UI only. I don't know any off the top of my head, but that's just what I've heard on hearsay.
How about creating the scenes? Is there anything about how that would work? So I'm imagining you don't create them with SwiftUI.
You do, actually.
You do?
Yes. So to get like the spaces, you mean, right?
Like an immersive experience, like
Yeah.
create your own museum.
Yeah, so they introduced a new Swift UI control called Reality View, and then you build your bits within Reality View. So you can have the 3D objects. I think going into an immersive space is actually the only way that you're able to do like the cool ARKit stuff. So being able to hit test the environment. So for people who don't know, hit testing is like firing like an imaginary bullet and then it landing on, say, like a couch or the wall or the floor or wherever you happen to be pointing at. So that's only available with the immersive space. And yeah, it used to be harder to do that. And so that's one caveat between visionOS and iOS, is that ARKit and RealityKit are completely different from each other. ARKit and RealityKit in visionOS, it's kind of simplified because they're all dependent on Reality View, and then you kind of build your Swift UI or UIKit interface within that.
Cool. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, Mr. Pat. Thanks, Gerald. Let me just trying to run double duty here. Pop that up a little bit. There we go. All right. So again, I threw this together this afternoon as well, but it was a talk I was planning on giving in a couple of months. Let me just pull up my notes. That's not the right notes app. Thank you. Cool. So this is basically, I've spent a bunch of time playing with Swift macros. This will be a bit of the development workflow that I ended up with, how I iterate, how I actually make this work. Unfortunately, I can't tell you how to deal with the Xcode bugs. I had to drop back to beta 2 to be able to do this because beta 4 just said no. Like every time I save the package.swift file, instant crash. So back to beta 2. And that seems to work okay. Part of this will also be a bit of a complaint about how crazy complex the Swift language actually is to parse and understand. So first up, if you haven't seen the macros presentation, especially the expanding macros one, I think it is, this is the best table or the best reference that you'll find on what all of the different macros are, because unfortunately the Swift docs have lots of long form text but no list that says, if you want to do this, this is the macro to use. So that, just a screenshot from the talk, definitely the best table and the best reference that's out there. All right, so fingers crossed this actually works. I'm not sure, you might have seen there's a Aspireable macro package that somebody published a couple of weeks ago. That's actually really good. I was already building something similar, but this has actually turned into a really good way to learn Swift macros and Swift syntax, because Swift syntax is basically the whole problem, I guess, with Swift macros. It's a mildly complex thing. Let me close that. All right, so tip 1, don't try and write your macro code in actual where you're going to use it in your code. It's just too buggy. You don't really get any way to inspect what Xcode has generated or what your macro has generated until the compile errors start coming in, and then you've got to right click and expand macro and then view the things. Best way I found to iterate, set up a unit test for your macro. I'll just run that. Pop in your basic code that you want to do. Test is going to fail, but that's fine. But you'll see that the actual generated output at the bottom is exactly what your macro does. So by leaving this empty, you're basically saying, don't worry about the diff. I thought I said, yeah, thanks. Okay, that's really helpful. Even though do not disturb is on, it's still doing that. Anyway, thanks, team. Yeah, so by leaving the whole point of the assertion is that you're comparing the generated code with what you expect to see. But if you leave it empty, then you get a nice, clean diff output of the actual code that I wrote, and then what I'm expecting the macro to do, effectively. So let's walk through this quickly. The other one as well is really helpful to, if I go into mockable macro, so inside your standard macro expansion, first thing I always do, because I've got no clue how I can look at this code and know what the hell that actually means, what that actually translates to in Swift syntax. First line is always to dump the declaration. And I just leave that there constantly throughout the whole thing. So then when we actually run that again, if I expand this up, you'll see that this 3 lines of code translates into this syntax tree. And then when you actually go to try and pass the syntax tree, you've got the syntax tree right there. There's also a website called Swift AST Explorer, I think, .com. That's actually very helpful. I find this is a bit quicker because it's a quicker iteration time and I'm not waiting for a website. Plus, if I'm doing work stuff, I'm pretty sure my boss would be very unhappy with me posting work code into a foreign website. So this stays in Xcode. Right, so the other part that I put onto this is I just have an empty one that I can use to go the other way. So if I'm trying to, actually I'll come back to that, but if I'm trying to, you write out the source code you're expecting to see, look at the syntax tree, and then you can actually reverse it that way. But I'll get to an example of that. Okay, so the first thing, first tip is dump everything. Dump repeatedly, write it out, try it, read it, because Swift is actually really bloody complicated. So if I do a function with a couple of args, and the good thing about Swift syntax is this doesn't actually need to compile, it just needs to be readable. Save that, run that. Don't you dare. So we see now the syntax tree is a lot bigger. But it's not more complicated. So there's got the macro itself, attribute list syntax, symbol type. So that's the macro declaration. The actual protocol keyword, it's got a public modifier on it. It's called service, and it's got some stuff inside it. The stuff inside it is a member declaration with a list inside that, which has a function declared. And you can see it as you go through. There's actually more errors. Oh, I got some syntax errors in that. What did I do wrong? No, it looks right to me. Where's the protocol? It shouldn't have a return value. Doesn't need to have a return value. But anyway, you can see it's passed it anyway. And what I wanted to get to is this bit here. So this here, inside the function signature, is a function parameter list syntax. Cool? It's got a function parameter, 2 function parameters, one called arg1, one called arg2, with some types. Pretty straightforward. But if I were to then do, instead, go a type alias and do exactly the same, I'll copy and paste so there's no way I can get it wrong. And return void. So same thing, it's a closure instead of a function. Signature's the same. Let's see if we can actually figure out what went wrong with that. So I didn't change the other one, now it's fine. Anyway, oh no, there is an error there. Oh, I know what that was. I was testing something else, but they've got a better error there now. Cool, that's good to see. Okay, so we've got, where are we? Do thing, here we go. Type alias declaration. The type alias keyword at the start, it's called do thing. But this time, instead of being, what was it? A function parameter list syntax, it's now a tuple type element list syntax. So this exact bit of code that I copied and pasted, because it appears somewhere different, has an entirely different structure. And mapping between those two can get really complicated. and has tripped me up so many times. Generally, when you're trying to write Swift syntax, as long as you're using the builder stuff, you can't get it wrong too much. But trying to parse it is just a gigantic headache. So that error that came through, the reason that's there is because I was testing this before. Did I actually break it? Lock function. In the initializer, something, something. This one. Oh, it looks right. All right, so if I go back to this. So this is where understanding the basic building blocks of Swift, the difference between a declaration, an expression, and a statement actually is really important to Swift syntax. To you and I, they're all the same, right? I can never remember the difference between a expression and a statement. I'm pretty sure one's a subset of another, but I always get it around the wrong way. But if I go down here to the actual generated code, so this line here, so what this macro does is it takes that function declaration, creates a type alias for it with the handler function, sets it as a variable. So it's generating a mock class basically. So you can pass in a closure. Your closure is called whenever the function is called. We create an initializer with an optional one on it, and then we set that value. So this line here, it comes from, not that function, this function here. So I've made a function called make initializer assignment. I'm returning an array of expressions, and you can see that it's self.property name equals property name, which is exactly the same because I'm using the property name as the variable in the initializer. Now this is an expression. So what happens if I change that? So if I change that to a statement, and then I rerun it again, such a small code window. So rerun that again, you'll see that it's not worked. Great, what have I done? Oh, I took the thing out. When did I do that? Put that back. Okay, so it hasn't errored, but you'll see that for some reason it's on, it's up here. For some reason it's now on the same line as the last declaration or as the last statement. It hasn't put the new line in there. There's no semicolon. That's a compiler error. But it's not a compiler error on the Swift syntax macro generation side. It's a compiler error in the generated code that you then have to try dig in and go, well, what the hell does that mean? Which you hope Xcode's playing nice, but sometimes it's not. So getting those right is important. And I've seen it do some really weird stuff like put extra spaces around quotes and stuff like that. Like, so if you see the code looks wrong, you've probably got a declaration statement or an expression mixed up somewhere there. Couple of last things. It's easy to go off the examples that Apple provides and try to put everything into your macro declaration. I've actually found it's a whole lot easier to remember that we are in Swift. We can use types and classes, and if you're going to generate a bunch of things that are related, put it into a type with an initializer that has properties. So if I'm generating some function stuff, I've popped this in here. The passing function's in there as well, but I just generalize it down, right? This is the original declaration, and these are the bits that I'm generating off the back of it, so that when it comes time to actually make the function, to actually print the function body as a code block syntax with all the code inside it, this is a lot easier to read, especially if you put examples of what you're expecting it to look like in the doc blocks, than it is if you try and do it all in as spaghetti code in the other one, which is what Apple's kind of examples tend to lead you towards. But you definitely don't have to do that. Last 2 bits, 3 bits? 3 bits. You really, as it's generated code, you probably don't need to care too much about the white space and the trivia, as Swift syntax calls it. But you know, some people do. Sometimes it's actually important. There is a really cool thing called, let me find somewhere I can do this. Here, XPR syntax, right? There is, if you ever need to actually take something that it's either passed itself or you're moving code from one spot to another and transforming it, there is a handy property called trimmed, which will return the declared element without all the white space and without all the other garbage, meaning that if you then use that where you're outputting your code, you're not going to get bonus tabs or spaces that were in front of it, or extra bonus new lines and stuff like that. It's going to make it a lot easier to debug where things are going wrong as well. So trimmed is very important. Oh, okay. Last two. You saw in this bit that we can see all of this stuff inside the declaration that we've attached to. But you cannot see or understand anything about the code that comes in. So you can see I've got this something else property, which we assume is a type, but we know nothing at all about that type. All we know is that it has an identifier, which is a string called something else. That's all we know. We don't know what it is. If it's a type alias for strings, we don't know what it conforms to. We have no context as to what that is. So it's equally important if we were to put, an extension on this. So let's say we made this. I don't know why I'm making it nice, because it doesn't really care. Right, and we put an extension on that. I don't know. Where other type is string, and we did some stuff here with the default implementation, blah, blah, blah. If you actually build that, on the declaration itself, oh no, that's the full tree. The declaration itself has no mention of the extension. It's only the declaration that you can see, and it's only what's inside this code block that you can work with, which makes the last point I want to talk about, generics. Generics are basically impossible with the amount of information we get given to infer anything at all about a generic other than the fact that it's a generic. So you might think with our nice, what am I going to call this? Thing type, whatever. As Swift programmers, we would think where in code these two are equivalent. Like when Xcode gives it to us, we know that other type will be inherited from thing type. That's something we know as engineers. That's something that Xcode will give to us. In Swift syntax, I don't know where that problem's gone. Anyway, in Swift syntax, here we go. They're different, right? So this one is associated type, other type, generic requirement list, generic requirement syntax, a conformance syntax, and it conforms. So this type, other type, conforms to this type. Cool, straightforward. The other one, let me bring that back up there, is now a parameter clause syntax, a function parameter list syntax. No, I've gone too far. Here, it has, the associated type, other type. It has a where clause after it, and then the where clause says that, this part is the same, but it's located in two very different places. So if you wanted to try and actually do something with that generic, if you wanted to try and actually make it possible, so let's say, and it's exactly the same on function arguments, right? So this is, so if I would then do this, this would have been a better example to begin with. Right? These are equivalent, but in Swift syntax, they're very different. So if you then try to do something with that, you need to first of all consolidate down your generic lists from multiple places, try and collect the conformances from multiple places, just to get to a list that says other type conforms to this, and then you hope that you have it all. You can do that, it's just painful, hugely painful, to end up with basically the same thing, right? Because you can't use a generic in a type alias, we have to abstract the generic out, figure out if we can conform it to anything, figure out if it conforms to multiple things. Like, that's one thing. What if I then go other type, other thing? You know, now you've got two. So now you've got to squash the generics together, turn them into an ampersand function. I didn't fix that. And that's where the other thing is going wrong too. That's where that error is coming from. Cool. But yeah, you can see you can do that, but it's a lot of effort to unpack generics and to gather their conformances, so it's a lot more work than you might think. That was everything I wanted to talk to. Were there any questions? Sure.
How do you decide what you're going to use macros for and what you're not going to use macros for?
I've tried to use macros for 6 things now, and I've been successful in 3. So there's the first one, I wanted to replace a property wrapper. I actually wanted to replace a couple of property wrappers with a macro. Once I was successful, once I wasn't, because the first one, can I do this on here quickly enough? We'll see. Yeah, so the first one relied on outside conformances, and it uses that. You can't see that inside the macro because it's outside the declaration. So you could do the macro work, but the error that it's going to give back to the user if they misuse the macro is unintelligible. They won't know how to fix it because it's going to be a standard Xcode parser error. Whereas with the property wrapper, it will tell you that you're missing a conformance to a protocol. So that was the first one. Some of the other ones have been more successful. This one seems to be working, though I'm still trying to deal with associated types and a couple of other fun things that I haven't quite nutted out properly yet. Closures inside function declarations are also fun. But this one has taught me a whole lot of edge cases that I never would have considered before. So it's been a really great introduction to that. Basically, the advice is try it and find out. Worst that happens is you waste a few hours, or maybe several days like I did. That's all right.
So it seems there's a balance here between obfuscation and convenience. And where do you land on that? Do you think this is mostly for library code? Yeah,
I think so. I'm mainly using it for 2 things. One is to automate generation of boilerplate. That's the main one, or to remove boilerplate, stuff that you repeat often. Again, you can't. This one is okay because I can use a peer macro to add boilerplate alongside the declaration. But if you were trying to do that in different files, for example, to generate like this is a test helper, but it has to live in the main code, so I have to if debug it, and I have to put an assertion in there to make sure it can't accidentally be used inside real code. So there's a whole bunch of workarounds like that. Ideally, I'd like to declare the macro in a test target, but you can't do that because it's in a separate file and you can't see that. So yeah, you can do boilerplate's the main one. The other one is to replace the use of mirroring, which you could do with boilerplate to generate a walker or a visitor type thing, and that's what I'm doing now. So boilerplate's the main one.
Any other questions?
thank you.
Think we're good. I can ask more.
You can ask me afterwards at the pub
Yeah.
because we're over time.
Cool.
Can I have the thing back, and then we'll wrap up. Let's see if I laid this out. I did. All right. So that's it for tonight. A huge thank you to Andrew and to Gerald and to Amy for speaking tonight. Big round of applause for them. As well, a big thank you to our sponsors, Itty Bitty Apps and Baloo, for their support, ongoing support throughout these things. Reminder that the Hack Night is on next Wednesday, back here in this very room. It's an alcohol-free event. Bring your laptops. Come prepared to learn things and to play with things and to get help while you're playing with things. The Drinks Night is on at Fad Gallery last Tuesday of the month, the 25th, which I think is in 2 weeks because we've got a shorter month. Again, 6 p.m. But there's a Drinks Night channel on Slack, which is the best place to keep up to date. People will tell you where we're sitting, like if we found a table, that sort of stuff. And that's it. There'll be several people from here will head over to the Mitre Tavern, which is a couple of blocks away, to have a bit of social time afterwards. You're more than welcome. Everybody's more than welcome to join us. Just follow the crowd. Otherwise, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next month.